Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. And joining us today for the first time will be WFOV 92.1 Community Radio, and we're glad to have them aboard. And we'll be pausing about 5 seconds into the broadcast and allowing them to have their time about 26 minutes into the program. Glad to have you with us this afternoon, as always, on Monday. We come together every Monday, without exception, from 2 o'clock to 3. And our partners in crime, they'll be here next week. We're joined by them every second and fourth Mondays. And I look forward to the time when their program comes on a weekly basis as well. They have a very good show that comes on at 3:30. And they hang around until around 4 o'clock. And sometime when they're really doing a great job and they're trying to keep you apprised of what's going on, they'll stay around a little bit longer, but normally the program runs about 30 minutes. And we're glad to have them as part of the team here at allpointstv.com. And we'll always give some accolades to John, who's in the booth, and every once in a while he sees I'm in trouble in the studio. And he tries to come to my rescue and try to bail me out. And that's oftentimes the case, and I'll take all the help I can get. Again, glad to have you with us, and stay tuned for the next hour, and we're going to be talking about a few things here. And we'll start off. I want to ask John. John, did you read this article in the paper? They had this article. I think this is adding insult to injury. There's an article on the front page of the local newspaper. And it says, Flint resident facing a $10,000 water bill. You've got to be kidding me. The water in Flint, nobody's drinking the water in Flint. You pick up your bottle of water on whatever basis you need it, and they have these distribution centers. So nobody's drinking the water, and here this guy has a $10,000 water bill, and the water's not even drinkable. City says faulty meter. Miscommunication led to accumulation of debt. Now, I don't know, John, I don't know how you feel about that, but if I had a $10,000 bill and I can't drink the water, I don't think, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think I'd be a happy camper.
Well, if this was a private company providing the water and it was such a terrible shape, do you know the government, the regulators and all that would actually stop them from actually providing for it? But now it's them. They can actually not only try to get the collect on it, they can also, if you don't pay it, they could take your house.
I've heard that is part of what they've done here, because a lot of persons were refusing to pay. If you can't drink the water that comes through the tap in your home, then what service are you paying for when you're talking about paying your water bill? But, the city make the rules, and all law-abiding citizens are called to bear upon the rules, and if we don't do that, then what happens is that we face retribution.
That's
so we have to comply with the law.
It's just totally wrong because
whether it makes any sense or not.
You see, the government's got a double standard. They can do anything, but if it was a private corporation doing the same thing, they'd be up in arms about it. You have Senate committee hearings going on about it, but it's them. It's like basically they can get away with it, and they got that power that corporations wouldn't have. They don't have most corporations don't have the power to take your house from you. These people do. It's just doubly wrong. To me, it's just doubly wrong.
Yeah, it really is quite an event here. I hope this is resolved, because it doesn't make any sense to have that kind of a bill, and the services are not really up to par as far as what's being provided. $10,000 is a lot, whether your water's working or whether you drink your water or not. Okay, I thought I would bring that to the studio to start out with, because that seems to be a little bit much. First of all, you can't drink the water, and I don't know when you're going to have. Let's be honest here. I don't know if you're going to have anyone going back to drinking the water anytime soon. Even if they give the A-OK about the water being fine and drinkable and all the problems been worked out, it's going to take some time. And I think years we're talking about in terms of taking some time to get people back to believing in the delivery of services in the city. This has been a traumatic experience. Your water and your heat. Consumer power and the water, those are basic services. And when there's a breakdown in that, then the basic delivery of services is broken down.
You know what's really bad about this? If you look at Michigan on a map, people, if you're not from Michigan, look at Michigan. We're surrounded by fresh water. 10% of the world's fresh water supply is in our immediate reach, and yet we can't get water. We're paying more for water in a rich area for water than they did in Southern California after years and years of droughts. This is ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we've got to do a better job in the city of Flint and talk to a lot of residents, and they're not happy with what's going on, and we just got to do a better job in the city to provide for the residents' needs. And as I said, those basic services, you didn't take a rocket scientist to understand if you're not delivering basic services. The last thing you want to do is get a bill that says that you owe $10,000 in the water bill and you can't drink the water. I don't know what kind of meter breakdown that was, but if that bill had come to my home, I think I'd probably be down there at the next city council meeting and having something to say about it.
I think it underlines something too, the bogus claim that, politicians say they want to encourage private home ownership. Well, if they could take your house for backwater, bills, liens against that, with that, then it goes to show you never truly own your house, no matter how much money it is you put into it, how much you're willing to keep up on it. They're willing to take it from you because any kind of contention with them, they're willing to seize your asset. And it's not your asset; it's theirs. And that's
John, there's a real problem in the city. I know we have a declining tax base. I own a house in the city, so I'm tied in. I don't live in the city, but I'm tied into the politics of the city because I do own property. I have. I'm not renting the property out; just simply holding it. And I pay tax on it to keep it up, and I'm part of the tax base. But I'm really concerned about the direction in which the city is going in. I still wish the city of Flint well, because I'm right next door to it and living in the township. And they're trying to change the name of the township. John, we're trying to change the name of the township because they don't want it to have the attachment to the city's name. They think the name is a little bit much in terms of how it makes the township look bad. But be that as it may, that's a more expensive proposition they first of all thought. They thought just simply change the name. They didn't look at the fact that you got to change all of the stationery and a whole lot of things got to be changed in terms of what the names are.
I remember when they were
on the states and rather the county's business.
Well, in the late '80s, when they changed the name of Detroit Street to Martin Luther King Drive or Boulevard. It was a large amount of money attached to the business that still remained in that area. I mean, just that name street for the street will change. It did, I guess. However, if you want to look at it too, Pontiac, Auburn Hills split off basically, or divested themselves from it and called themselves Auburn Hills in the '80s, and that seems to be more prosperous. So I could see both sides of that, but I'd like to just ask to know, they wouldn't even have a community, a bedroom community, if it weren't for Flint, because that's where the factories were located, the bulk of them. So, I mean, it's kind of, I think it's kind of bizarre.
I would like to, we need to have our own identity, I think, out there. Nothing wrong with that. I don't think you're necessarily casting dispersions on the city of Flint by changing the name. You need to have the city has its identity, and the township needs to have an identity of its own as well. So I don't see it as a problem. I don't think it's to put the city down in that respect. But they have found out it's not as easy as they thought it was, and just simply switching the name, and they're all is well from that vantage point. Okay, I thought I'd bring that to your attention. Flint resident facing $10,000 water bill. That's not good, and I hope that is resolved amicably, where all parties are satisfied that they've been treated with justice. It does seem to be a bit much to be charging $10,000 for water when the water is not. Maybe it's changed now, but I don't think anybody's drinking the water in the city of Flint.
Corporations have been allowed, like Nestle, for example, have been able to pump water and bottle it from municipal water sources in other parts of the state, other states, millions of gallons for far less than that 10,000 that individuals being charged for a residence, here in Flint. I just find that how can a corporation package water coming from the state of Michigan way cheaper rate than we can for just mere use of it in a resident? You can't tell me that a resident, he or she could be running around the clock water in a sink and not going to use as much water as Nestle's was allowed to pump out for a relatively pittance comparison. I don't see how that can be justified. I really don't.
Yeah, it's a real problem. Okay, I'm going to move on. I thought I would bring that to the studio and we would share that with you. What I want to talk about basically today is the article I did on Facebook. I did a 2-part series on Facebook, the first part yesterday, and I raised a question, and it might seem like it's being disrespectful. It wasn't intended that way, and I don't think it actually is disrespectful. But the question had to do with are the American people too far gone to be able to live in a Republican form of government? And I raise that question only because I see that we are more and more with each passing day losing some of the particulars put in place by the framers. And if we're not careful, this experiment could go the way of the world. I mean, this is not something to throw a stick at and to claim that raising the question is being disrespectful of the American people. It's just to be aware of what's going on. And I think that what's happening right now, there's some real questions here about the future of this country. And I wanted to bring to the studio, I brought this book here, a book written by Larry Schweikart and Michael Allen. The book is called A Patriot's History of the United States. And I want to read one paragraph from this book because this has to do with this part of our subject today, and that is the republic that was created by the framers, and what was being said about it at the time that they had completed their work, which started off in June. It started off June 25th, 1787, when they had the Constitutional Convention. And it would last almost a full 3 months. It was 8 days short of that, starting on June 25th, and then it lasted until September the 17th. 8 more days would have been 3 months exactly, but 8 days short of a 3-month period. They were in that room drawing up a new document to replace one that they felt had run its course, that had been shown to be too weak in order for it to work. And having gone to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, they decided that they could not fix the articles. The 13 articles were beyond repair, and therefore they needed to transcend the document and dismiss it and draw something else up in its place. And they did so by drafting the Constitution. And they were very secretive about it because they didn't want to jump the gun, so to speak, in terms of drafting a document and everybody's out there talking about it before they can get it finished, and before they had completed, it'll be a fait accompli as far as people having made up their mind about what it was that they felt one way about it or another, and they were not going to possibly be all that happy about it because they weren't sent there to Philadelphia to draft an entire new document. They were sent there to revise the Articles of Confederation. But these geniuses that were there, this was the best and brightest that America had to offer at that time. Some real geniuses in that room. You're talking about Alexander Hamilton. You're talking about not Jefferson wasn't there. Jefferson was the one that wrote the Declaration of Independence. He wasn't at the Constitutional Convention. But they had some heavyweights in there. Hamilton, they had James Madison, Hamilton and Madison, by the way, would be two of the main authors of the Federalist Papers, because once they have drawn the document up, they now have to explain themselves to the American people about what it was they were doing. And they're going to have to sell what they did in that room to the American people who are not privy to what was going on there, because there were no reports of it. They were holding their chips very close to the vest. They want the word to get out. And at the end of the conference, at the end of the almost 3-month meeting, there's a conversation that is reported in the book called A Patriot's History of the United States. Larry Swikard and Michael Allen did a brilliant job in this book. And on page 111, they have a conversation that went on with between Ben Franklin and an unidentified woman. The name of the woman is not given. But Benjamin Franklin, who was the elder statesman of the group, when I say the group here, I'm talking about a group of revolutionaries. And people get really bent out of shape when I tell them that the American Revolution, unlike the French Revolution that will take place 13 years later in 1789, this revolution in America that took place starting in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence was a conservative revolution. And people almost fall off their chairs when you say that, because they cannot imagine conservatives holding a revolution. They think of it in terms of liberals doing so, and this was a conservative revolution, and that's why it played out so differently than the revolution in France. The American Revolution was one in which the fighting went on while the war was taking place for the independence, when it was clear they were not going to be given the independence without having to defend it, the premises that were in the Declaration, and they had to fight for it in order to make it come into fruition. And they did so from 1776 until 1783. And after the fighting was over, and after the British had decided they were not going to be able to resolve this problem through conflict and on the battlefield, and signed a treaty to therefore absorb these 13 colonies of any relationship to the British crown, then and only then did the fighting stop. But it did stop after it was over, and there was no retribution in the aftermath of this Revolutionary War that was fought. You can compare that with what occurred in France. And one of the best books, by the way, if you want to read about it, I think one of the best books is a book put out by Ann Coulter. Coulter does a very good job. Two of her books are really important. One is called Mugged, M-U-G-G-E-D, Racial Demagoguery from the 1970s to Obama. And if you read Ann Coulter's books, and I have a lot of respect for Ann Coulter as a researcher. I don't know if she's all that good of a writer, but her research is impeccable. And in her book, in this book, she has one out that I like also on liberalism, and I read a lot of those books because I think liberalism is a real problem in this country. I think that those two books are critical pieces of what she's put together in her research. But the book called Mugged, I think is in chapter 5 and chapter 6, either 5 and 6 or 6 and 7 in her book, where she does a write-up first on the revolution in the United, what will later on become the United States. And then she does a comparison of that revolution with the one that occurred in France, and by contrast you can see that the one that was starting, Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, I think it started in October of 1793. In other words, the revolution starts in 1789, but the overthrow of the king, and also his wife, the king's wife, Marie Antoinette. Both of them were beheaded in this revolution. There was no beheading that you had in the United States. It just didn't happen. And that speaks volumes of the framers, because not all were aboard when this revolution started. I think only about 2% of the people were actually involved in bringing this revolutionary change about in this country, and those who were on the sidelines waiting to see what would happen. Most people, you know how they say they have three people that in the world, those who make things happen. That's about 2% of the people in the colonies. And then those that watch what happens, that's probably the greater bulk of people, those on the sideline acting as spectators, and they're watching what happens. And then you got this other group, the Duh group, that group that wonder what happened. I mean, they watch everything and they're going back and forth like a ping pong match or a tennis match, and they're watching both sides. And then after everything is over and everything is run its course, they're trying to figure out, what did happen. And that's a large percentage of the population also. But that 2% involved in making it happen, after the war was over, they laid down their weapons and they began to put together this new experiment. And because it was so new, meaning it had never been done before, I don't know, there's nobody even today that started out a government by first of all writing down what it would do to limit itself. Have you ever seen anybody do that before or since this time period, where you overthrow a government and before establishing the next government, you sit down and you write about how you're going to place limits upon the government that you are in fact setting up. This is the first, and they have to be very careful about it, because in that room you have the best and brightest there, but a lot of folks on the outside of that room would not have understood what's going on. They would not have even probably supported them going there and exceeding their charge at the convention, which was to just revise the articles. But having gotten in that room and all of them putting their minds together, they saw that wasn't going to happen. That wouldn't fix the problem. The problem was beyond being fixed in what they had in the articles. They had to start all over again. And there are some saying even today, with what is being called for in the Article 5 Convention today, and 12 states have joined in for calling for a Constitutional Convention. A lot of people saying they're scared of it, but I'm not. I think that may well have been the time may well have come for that. But they are in that convention there, having been given a charge to go there and do the work of revising and making it more palatable for the document to be workable. And they got there and talking among themselves, these scholars, and they decided that it just can't work. It took them some time to come to that conclusion, but over a period of time, within that almost 3-month period of time of their meeting, they decided that they don't have, it cannot be made to work. And so now they have to be very quiet about meeting, because they're going beyond the charge that they had been sent there to do, and they did not want person to know they're exceeding their orders. Otherwise, that meeting would have been brought to a halt, and then nothing would have been done. They would have had broken articles in place and nothing to show for their time there, and no document that would make things better. And they were determined to get this thing right. That's why they met there so long. June 25th to September 17th, 1787, they met in that room. Mosquitoes, hot weather, sweating, no air conditioning. They met in that room for almost 3 months. And it's amazing how from scratch they got so much right. And we're going to take a break right now. We'll come back to this in just a minute. We're going to take a break right now to allow for WFOV 92.1 Community Radio to identify itself. Okay, we're back, and we're going to take that only took about 5 seconds at the studio, but WFOV took as much time as they needed to do their part in the program. I hope you will stay tuned for the second part of the program here at allpointstv.com, and want to again welcome WFOV 92.1 Community Radio.
Now I'm going to interject here too. Under this, Mr. Ross so far has covered the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, the major differences between the two revolutions. So,
yeah, it's a tremendous difference between the two. I mean, nobody lost their head in this revolution. They were fighting against the British, and they had people that were siding with the British inside the country. And after the war was over, they didn't go around looking for those persons as traitors. There were the two sides had fought. One side came out on top, and that was the end of that conflict. And there was no retribution after that conflict come to a close. That shows you something about the framers and about those who lived in the colonies. Very different than from revolutions. And I don't think anybody can say they've seen anything like that before or since.
Another thing I'd like to say, the difference between I've seen is that the French Revolution had many of the people who are behind that actually had this kind of animus against the Catholic Church, which represented Christianity to them. Whereas England already had such a divergence. They already split away from the Church of Rome. They already had Protestant, what we would consider pretty Protestant denominations going on there. There was many reasons why English culture actually developed with far more possibilities for liberty. Voltaire covers that from Letters from England. He talked about that. He had a great appreciation and admiration for the British because they actually had some ideas of rights in mind, and it wasn't so hard. There was a lot more anger attached to what was going on in the French in the Revolution. And they also had animus against the Christian church, and they replaced the Christian church with this, religion of man and all this stuff. And I think that actually degenerated very rapidly into the horror scene that we saw unfold. That's what I think. So,
You're very, John. You're very prescient in your observations. I always have a lot of respect for what John says because he does his homework. The Anglican Church, which was set up in England in 1547, all of these, in other words, these countries want to nationalize the church. The Protestant Revolution in Germany in 1517 with Martin Luther, in terms of his attachment of 96 complaints against the Catholic Church in Wittenberg, Germany in 1517. And then 30 years after that was over, you have the Anglican Church being set up in England. And they're setting the church up because the Pope is reaching into the countries and ordering the kings around. There's a very good book out about that written by Della Rosa called The Vicars of Christ, The Dark Side of the Papacy, which is a very good book. And Della Rosa does a brilliant job of tracing that history down. So the main thing, though, is that coming down to the 18th century, with all this history that they brought here from the European background, basically England, the movement has been going more and more toward more and more liberty. Less government and more liberty, which starts in England, quite frankly, with the Great Charter in 1215. The Magna Carta, the great Charter, where they tried to restrict John I. So this is just a tumbling effect. I mean, this revolution doesn't just happen out of whole cloth. A lot of things are going on here. 1215, you had 1628 under the Stuart King Charles I, who had been given a petition of rights in 1628. He had been in power for 3 years at that point, having come in as the second Stuart King in 1625. Don't forget, James I had been the first Stuart King from 1603 to 1625. King James probably knows because you know him because he's the one that ordered the translation of the Bible into the King James. They call it the King James version. Well, King James couldn't. James James was illiterate, so it's not his version. It's the version of those who wrote the Bible, translated it out of the Septuagint, translated out of the Latin, the Vulgate Bible, the Jerome Bible, and also out of the Septuagint, which is the Greek Bible. And in that translation into English, you can imagine that James first couldn't supervise it because he didn't have, these kings were no more literate than the major population. They did have an illiterate class, but sometimes it would not be the king. The king is the one. The king is just the one that has the military. But I'm just saying here, the tradition of that revolution wasn't just out of whole cloth. They came here with some ideas of how to refine that which they left over in England and other parts of Europe. And one of the things they left in Europe, by the way, was this idea that they want to get away from the taxation that was basically these arguments are about the taxation. And they came here to avoid taxation. And you can go read some of the documents and see that this was not about taxation without representation. They were talking about taxation, period.
See, our friends on the left would say, the taxation now is different because we have, instead of the monarchy enjoying the benefit of it, now it's the people for these social programs. And they might have a valid point there to some degree, but look at the power to tax is also the power to destroy. And they don't want to admit that little part of it. That's what they don't want to admit.
Yeah, and taxation is a form of theft, and that's how they saw it. And they were objecting to it. And they came here to get away from it. And they had petitioned Charles I. Charles I was the second Stuart king who reigned from 1625 to 1649 and was the first king in Europe who was beheaded. And you can talk about Julius Caesar that was stabbed to death in 44 BC. But I'm not talking about stabbing. I'm talking about beheading a king. And when that occurred, it sent all kinds it was hysteria. They were saying the British are cutting off the heads of their kings. And that was something because you only had kings at this time. The only time you had kings' heads cut off were in these wars where you'd be fighting these tribal wars and you wanted to decapitate the army that you were fighting, and the one where you did that symbolically is decapitate the leader of the king. But for people to cut the head off of their own king, that was unheard of. And they did that with Charles I in 1649. And so they're bringing that history over into the colonists. There, as a matter of fact, 8 of those 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence, 8 of them had been born in England. And I listed where they were from in one of my posts. So but they had an idea of what they were objecting to when they were there, and they came here to exercise other options based upon those objections, and they were very, very much aware of this oppression that as they saw it by centralized power, and that would explain why they had such a weakened government at first under the Articles, because they did not want a strong government. They left that over in Europe, but in so weakening it, he wasn't able to do anything, and that was revealed in 1786 with the Shades Rebellion that occurred in Massachusetts. And when they found out that they could not come to the rescue of Massachusetts because all the governments were weakened and they didn't have a standing army and they couldn't respond to it, they realized that all of those colonists were endangered by not having a strong federal government. Therefore, they want to strengthen it. At the same time, they want to control it. So this is what the writers of this book, A Patriot's History of America, A Patriot's History of the United States, this is what they wrote about a conversation between Ben Franklin, the elder statesman. Can you imagine a man of his age being a revolutionary? You know, the young people are the revolutionaries. Here is an older man, another one of the intellectuals, the great Benjamin Franklin, joining in with the young upstarts, people like the author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, people like John Adams, who was the original person delegated to write the document, but didn't have the skills Jefferson had, so he ends up bowing to Thomas Jefferson because Jefferson was a better writer, and we have this document in Jefferson's name because Jefferson was the one that wrote the document, although there were 5 members on the committee, of which one of them was John Adams. But John Adams was able to subjugate his ego and let a better man do what only at that point Jefferson could have done. I don't know if anybody else could have written that document as Jefferson wrote it. So after the war has ended, 4 years after that was over, because the war came to a close after 7 years from 1776 to 1783. 4 years after the war ended in 1783, they're now in Philadelphia, supposed to revise the articles, decided not to revise it, but to throw it out and create a new document, now having drafted the Constitution. A lady outside the room was wondering about all this secrecy. She asked Benjamin Franklin, probably because he was the elder statesman. She asked him about what it was in that room they were creating. And here's how Mike Adams and Larry Schweikart reported. From the outset, the proceedings had perched perilously on the verge of collapse, making the found document indeed a miracle. Because given all of the arguing going back and forth, think about that for a minute. They're doing something that had never been done before. There was no blueprint anywhere in the world. And they're having to create this out of whole cloth. Not that they weren't aware of a whole lot of things that happened before that. They're certainly having a tempering effect upon what they're creating, but they didn't have anything they were drawing from as far as a constitutional document. They could say, well, we're going to transfer this over there. All they had was what they were trying to get rid of, the Articles of Confederation. They were aware of some of the mistakes other governments had made, but there was no document they could pull from. And he says here, from the outset, the proceedings had perched perilously on the verge of collapse. This meeting could have turned into chaos at any moment now. And the only thing that kept that from happening was their commitment to getting it right, making the final document indeed a miracle. When the convention ended, a woman buttonholed Franklin and asked what kind of government the nation had. And Benjamin Franklin answered, "A republic, madam," Franklin replied, "if you can keep it." And that was what I was raising yesterday. It created a whole lot of backlash in terms of, one person wrote, I was putting down the country and vilifying Americans and all of that. That was not the intent, nor is that what occurred. What I was writing is what Benjamin Franklin was talking about, because Benjamin Franklin understood something here when he answered this lady, when he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And what he was talking about there is that a republic does not keep itself. You have to have people that are paying attention to what's going on, and someone has to rise up in every generation to do the work of maintaining the republic, because it will not maintain itself without people's involvement in maintaining it. They're creating a republic, madam, if the people can keep it, because they've seen one republic after another coming into its own, and then the flames flickering out over time, and those republics going out of existence. In fact, you go read a book, very good book, written by a French, I would call him a philosopher. Basically, though, he was a polymath. You know, this person, sometimes you have a jack of all trades and a master of all the trades, and this person wrote a book called The Ruins of Empire, Ruins. Constantine Francis Volney. Absolutely brilliant, in his book called The Ruins, Ruins, The Ruins of Empire. And that book goes to all these empires. He goes there, and he's standing there looking at all these once great empires. You can name them. And it all run their course. It all burned out. They no longer existed. They were a part of historical memory, but did not exist in the present. And he wanted to go there to those empires, to the ruins of those empires, and ask the question, what happened? What occurred that brought these once great empires, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire in 525, the Assyrian Empire the Assyrian Empire 663. This is in the BC period. The Egyptian Empire, which goes back around 3150 BC, not the empire itself, but the unification of Egypt later on leading to the empire under the 18th dynasty, pretty much Thutmose III and those persons, on the Menoteph and the Thutmoses in that dynasty. Thutmose III, called the Napoleon of antiquity. And so these empires were once great. And what Volney did was go to those empires to interrogate those ruins, to look at those ruins and see what story they had to tell. What caused these empires to collapse like that? Because they were formidable in their day. What happened to them? And he's there, and he has this. Volney does a very good, interesting job. He's talking to what he calls the genius. And very few people have picked up that he was actually talking to his alter ego. You know, you talk about the genius in terms of old genius, but he's talking to himself. He's asking his inner self for an understanding of what the ruins mean. He says, "Oh, genius, what do these ruins have to teach about what's great back in the time period when they once were walking the earth in great majesty and with great respect, the best of their time at that point in history? And yet look at how they've been reduced to ruins. What happened here?" And that is a question that Franklin is raising to an extent. It's a republic, but Franklin is aware that republics had come throughout history and they're gone the way of the wind. And he's telling the people, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And that is the question I was raising. not to denigrate the country, not to put the country down, but to call the country to understanding his mission. And I can remember a conversation that was held back in the day between the great Paul Robeson talking to the later on to be great, but not great at this time, Harry Belafonte, who became great in bringing music from the islands, from the Bahamas, quite frankly. And when I went there and was talking to some folks, by the way, in the Bahamas, and I mentioned some of the songs that Belafonte had made famous over here, they knew exactly, and they took that for granted. I wasn't telling them anything that was. Those songs were still being sang there. He brought them here, but he wasn't big at that time. But he was talking. He was on the feet of the great Paul Robeson, whose career was on a trajectory going downward at this point. But at one time, Paul Robeson was up there at the top of his game. A great actor, great football player at Rutgers College. Was a student in 20 languages. Some of them he could listen to and understand. Some he could speak. This man was a polymath also. And so at the time that Belafonte meets him, the great Paul Robeson's career had run its course. And here was the broken Paul Robeson, and the one who lost his career because of his controversy, because of the McCarthy period and so on and so forth. And he was one of those persons who was out here trying to do some things that were not necessarily politically correct and ran into a lot of problems because of that. Lost his passport and things of that sort, wasn't able to travel outside the country, and lost his career, lost everything. And at this point in time, Belafonte is sitting at the feet, I should say, of Paul Robeson, and he asked Robeson, because this empire that he represented, once great, but not now at that point. He asked Paul Robeson a critical question. He said, Paul, you have lost everything that you once worked for. If you knew then what you know today, would you, knowing then what you know now, would you have done the same thing that you did? And Paul Robeson answered him, and he said he would do the same thing. But one thing he did not understand at that time, and I can say this also about myself, because you know how you think when you're young, you're going to set the world on fire. You're going to save the world. But Paul Robeson told Belafonte, he said, there's one thing I did not understand. I did not understand at the time that every generation has to rise up and it has to save itself. That's what Benjamin Franklin is talking about. The framers put a tremendous vision in place, wrote things down on parchment. The world had never seen a document like that. And I don't care what Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, there's been no document written in the history of the world that exceeds this document. Even today, some almost 300 years later. No document has been written that exceeds a document written by the drafters of the Constitution, later ratified in 1788, and the government hitting the ground running in 1789, having elected George Washington in the previous year, and Washington taking office the following year. The world had never seen anything like it. They never even had a president before George Washington in the history of the world. George Washington was the first in that respect. Not just the first president of the United States, the first president in the history of the world. This is something very new here. And Franklin was saying that they've created a republic. They intentionally did not set up a democratic form of government. And I was saying this on radio the other day. In fact, last week I had a very good time with some very good people on this radio program. WFOV, by the way, 92.1. Maybe that's why they wanted. Maybe that's why they invited me to come and do part of their broadcast. We're very glad to accommodate them because they are a quality operation, and we certainly think we're a quality operation here at allpointstv.com. But I was simply trying to make it clear that these persons that were at that conference, these were, and Ayn Rand makes this point, these were the country's first intellectuals, and she's right in saying in the book called, what's the name of that book that she wrote? The New Intellectuals, her book, is the book she wrote, one of the books she wrote, and she said that they were this country, meaning the founders, the framers, they were this country's first intellectuals, and so far its last intellectuals. We have not produced anyone yet, to this date, to top the framers. And you can forget it over there at Harvard University, Brown University, these Ivy League universities. These are, I'm not saying these are not great schools. I'm saying that they have not produced anything to top what was in that room. And anyone who thinks you can come behind the framers and you can get it right and they had it wrong, you're making a critical mistake. A lot of you talking about revising the Electoral College, a big mistake. Because one of the things the framers did was, in fact, they tried to understand why republics had gone out of existence. Is because republics tried to set up democratic governments, mob rule, and they recognized that. And therefore, their charge was, and I was saying this on WFOV 92.1, I was saying that one of the things that they recognize is that part of why these empires, these republics, had gone out of existence. Look in Rome, the Roman Empire. Democracy, mob rule, where the mob wants to be in charge. Why? Because it has the numbers. But if you're going to rule based upon the numbers, then the rule is autocratic against those who are not part of that numerical group. And they want to rule because the numbers dictate it. Those that don't have the numbers, then what about their rights? And that's what the framers had to understand and deal with. And how they dealt with it was an act of absolute brilliance. They dealt with it in terms of the office that everyone in the country votes on when they vote. The nation only votes on one office in this country as a collective, and that's the President of the United States. Everyone has buy-in to who the leader of the country is going to be. And how do you deal with that, given the fact that there are 13 at this point, there are 13 states, and there are big states and there are small states, large states like New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, small states like Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire. How are you going to deal with that given these factions? And they came up with a brilliant way of dealing with it without suppressing the majority faction, because you don't want oppression to solve it where you suppress the majority faction. You want to be able to, in fact, neuter it to the point where it goes down somewhat. And what they did here was Electoral College, where you created multiple majorities, and today we have 50 majorities rather than a single majority. And you don't need to change that, because what you have here is not just democracy, but you have super democracy, because 50 majorities have to be considered in order for you to ferret out who the president is going to be. Absolutely brilliant on the part of the framers. We want to welcome aboard once again WFOV 92.1 Community Radio, and want you to stay tuned to their programming. They have some great programs, and we'll be seeing you again. And those of you that's on allpointstv.com, and you'll be hearing us again on WFOV next week at 92.1, and we hopefully be a part of your listening on a regular basis. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.
Also, I'd like to tell people you can catch Mr. Moss on Facebook. Why don't you tell them your page?
Read my Facebook posts. I post every day on Facebook. I want you to read that as well. And we're just trying to be a part of the community, involving the community and things we're trying to do here. And we certainly want to hear from you as far as what you're doing. Okay, again, see you next week, and hope you have a great time. And don't forget to follow your dream.